Okay, let's look at our next example. Write a similar loop that multiplies all the elements of a vector together. You might want to call the accumulator total prod, and you might want to think about the initial value you give it before the loop. So by similar loop, what it's referring to is just before this in the text, we provide an example about writing a script to calculate the summation or summing up all the elements of a vector. Here we want to multiply all of the elements by each other, so we'd like to calculate a continuous product. Okay, so this will be another good example of a reduce operator, a reduce operation. Plus, it'll be nice because MATLAB actually has built-in functions sum to sum up the elements of a vector and prod to calculate the product of the elements of a vector that we can use to compare and make sure that our code is working correctly. Okay, so let's go over to MATLAB and give it a try. Okay, so here I am now over in MATLAB, and let's write a script to calculate the continuous product of a vector. Okay, so I'll create a new script. So what will the script do? So this will compute the continuous product of a vector x. And just in case I can't remember what continuous product is, do it differently. We will multiply all of the elements of the vector together. So the precondition will be x, the vector we wish to compute the continuous product of. As a postcondition, so we said comprod variable. So this will just be the continuous product. Variable containing the continuous product. So the continuous product. Okay, got it. All right. So let's do it. Okay. So cumprod is going to be our accumulator variable. So when we're multiplying elements by each other each iteration, typically or usually you'll initialize your accumulator variable with the value of 1. Why? Because when I multiply anything by 1, I get that anything. Just like when we have summation operations, typically there you initialize your accumulator variable with 0 because anything plus 0 is that anything. Okay, so typically with summation operations, accumulator gets initialized with the value of 0. And typically when you have continuous products like this, your accumulator is going to get initialized with the value of 1. Okay, so then what are we going to do? We'll set up a for loop. So loop for I is equal to 1 to length x. Okay, and so we're generalizing our loop. So remember, when I have a vector, the first element of that vector is 1. In terms of finding the last element index, that's what length x is going to give us. So this is going to tell us that in the first iteration, we'll point to the first element of the vector. Last loop iteration, we're pointing to the last element, okay, the nth element. Okay, and so then what are we going to do? Okay, so we have a variable assignment. So each iteration will take the ith element of x. So again, we start with the first and end with the last. So take the ith element of x and multiply that by the current value of cumprod. Okay, so our accumulator variable. So first loop iteration, our accumulator variable has a value of 1 stored to it. So this will just be x of 1 times our accumulator, which will just result in x1. Next iteration will come around. Now cumprod will have stored to it x1, which will multiply by x2, and then we keep looping and building upon it. So initialize accumulator, and then this will be computing okay, and for the purpose of this exercise, at the end, let's just print the value of cumprod. Okay, oops, I need to go up and I need to save this. Cumulative product dot .m. I won't call it cumprod because I don't want to name the script the same thing as the variable, just to make sure I don't cause any conflicts. I want to make sure that when I have an assignment to variable, MATLAB doesn't interpret it as the script. Okay. So let's do it. So let's just use colon operator to create x. So let x be 1:10. So then if I run cumulative product, I just use tab to fill in the rest. Press return. Cumulative product is such. Okay, great. So MATLAB actually has a built-in function prod that will compute the continuous product or the product of all the elements of a vector. And so it's great practicing our MATLAB skills on problems like this when we have built-in MATLAB functions that can do the same thing, because it'll allow us to test to make sure our code is working correctly. Right? It's always great to test to make sure it's working properly. So the built-in function is prod. You can always search the documentation for product developments, but if I type help prod, okay, right, it'll bring up the documentation in our command window. But the basic operation would just be prod, and then the vector I want to compute the continuous product of. So prod x, I get this. If I were to rerun continuous product, I get exactly the same answer. So our code is working correctly. That's great.